Zion Williamson is both the Pelicans' biggest problem and biggest solution. And right now, the fan base is split right down the middle on him. Let's dive into why in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we are going to continue to break down the Pelicans fan survey and the results from it because some of the things are eye-opening, and today's show is all about Zion Williamson. Yesterday, we talked about, has Trey Murphy supplanted Zion Williamson as the face of the franchise? The results with Zion might say yes, but here's the thing. There's kind of a paradox around Zion Williamson. And we're going to dive into that. You're going to see the theme of that in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control over your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everyday. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Let me know if you're an everydayer in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. In that morning slot, we got a whole Locked On block on there. Same place you want your Pelicans play. There's Locked On Saints, Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU, and then Locked On SEC, and it's awesome. Same place you want your Pelicans play. Make sure you tune in from 10 to noon every single weekday. So let's get into this one. Fan survey results. This whole show is going to be around Zion Williamson because the results genuinely are very eye-opening here. The first takeaway that I have from this is fans flat out don't trust Zion Williamson to stay healthy, right? Like, that's not a huge surprise. In the survey, I asked on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you that Zion Williamson can stay healthy this season? The average score was 2.4. Like, that's basically neutral, slightly below neutral. That's the fan base saying, we hope, but we're not counting on it, right? Like, it's exactly in the middle. Tomorrow's show, Wednesday, middle of the week, we're going to be talking about things that are mid because a number of that was reflected in the fan survey here. You know, think about what a 2.4 means out of 5. Fans have lived through missed seasons, mid-season absences, injuries that derail the potential playoff run. You know, he's had one healthy season recently of, 2 years ago when the team won 49 games, but it's also not an 82 game season that he played, right? And look, the league takes notes on this. Other teams' analysis and national media all look at Zion Williamson as very, very high risk. And when you look at this fan base historically, spoiled by hope, frustrated by reality, Zion is a generational talent, but he hasn't had that full sustained healthy run the whole way, multiple seasons, to see the team potentially really thrive. Chris Paul did have that. Anthony Davis had that to a lesser extent, I think. Kind of being skeptical about some of these people, the results, being optimistic, but knowing the reality might kick in. That's kind of baked into the fan base's psyche here. And people want him to stay healthy, obviously, right? But the repeated injuries have made it also the default assumption that he won't be. And that's why this conversation is so hard. When it comes to Zion Williamson, it's not about talent. We know what that is. It's about availability. And that is truthfully the biggest obstacle when it comes to him. The fact that people were yeah, we think he's going to be healthy, every other year had I done this, and this is the first year we've kind of done this survey, people would have been yeah, I think he can stay healthy. Yeah, I think he can stay healthy. So, now when people are yeah, I don't think so. The optimism, has kind of run out a little bit when it comes to Zion Williamson. There's a lot of people that, look at him and go, oh, like, yeah, I'm not, it's like fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you kind of thing. Or is it the other way around? I forget. I think I got it wrong. Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Maybe that's what's going on here. I don't know. One of those, right? People have just kind of lost the patience to a degree with Zion Williamson. They're lacking the belief in Zion Williamson, right? When you look at it with yesterday's fan survey, that is very, when we talked about some of the stuff, like that's pretty apparent with how people kind of view Trey Murphy versus how they view Zion Williamson right now. People just don't think he's going to be healthy. They don't, and what that means, there's more to it than just we don't think he's going to be healthy. It means they don't believe he's going to take care of his body. They don't believe that he's going to do the things he needs to do to stay healthy. That's kind of all of the stuff that plays into this, right? Like that's even more concerning, damning, if you will, about how people view him. It's not just, well, he's going to get hurt. It's, we don't trust him to do the things to avoid the injuries. There's hope in it. That's why that score is a 2.4 out of 5, basically right in the middle. I think there's some optimism built into that, but normally in years past, that number would have been higher. And at this point, you're seeing the perception kind of really shift, the sentiment really shift. You even heard it from me. I've said I would go down with the Zion Williamson ship. Look, David Griffin got fired in part because Zion's injuries. If Zion wasn't injured and they were winning games and doing something in the playoffs, he wouldn't have been let go, right? Like they would have kept going with David Griffin. The ship went down, it felt like, last year. Not enough to make sweeping changes across the board, but the person in charge lost their job. And there were other reasons for all of that as well. But certainly, Zion Williamson played a massive factor into that. And so if people don't think he's going to get it right, get it correct, figure it out, I've long said we're on Zion. We had Zion 1.0 when he came into the league, then 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. I don't know what 0.0 we're on at this point anymore. But every time we say there's going to be a new Zion 0.0, and similar stuff still happens, right? So at a certain point, it's year 7. It's year 7. If we're hoping for something to be dramatically different, look, it could be. We would love that. We do hope for it. But I don't think anyone's expecting things to be massively different at times. Look, there's reasons to think it. The way he played on defense and how committed he was on that side of the ball was certainly eye-opening last year. When he carries such a big offensive load, it's very easy for those type of players to take possessions off on defense, to not try as hard on defense. But he was actively very engaged on the defensive side of the ball. He looked to be in the best shape of his career. He played some of the best basketball that we saw from him at the end of last season. 24.6 points per game, 5.3 rebounds being a career high, 5.3 assists being a career high, 7.2 rebounds, which was a career high. And he was doing this in very limited games, right? Limited minutes. Per 36 minutes last year, he averaged 31 points per game. Think about that one. 9 rebounds and almost 7 assists. That 31 points per game would have put him number 2 in terms of scoring per game. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander led the way at 32.7. Number 2 was Giannis at 30.4. If he goes out and puts up close to, call it 29, 9 and 7, that's insane. And that's why it makes Zion so difficult to figure out what to do. The highs are so high, but the lows are so low. This goes to what I'd said in the open of the show, right? Zion is both the biggest problem and the biggest solution. So if fans don't feel he's going to be healthy, this feeds directly into the next question. Do fans still see him as the cornerstone of the franchise? I'll give you the results. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what's in them. Whether it's your property, your mortgage, your 401k, investments, just a savings or checking account, you don't have the full picture. You can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. And Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch does it for you. Monarch is going to do the heavy lifting. I used it. You can link all of your accounts in just moments. Then you get clear data visuals, smart categorization of your spending, and you finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet, which all for that part, right? Look, I saw I was spending too much on Jordans and Nikes and other things, so we've kind of dialed that back a little bit, but it was eye-opening to see, and that's changed my financial habits. That's going to help me save more money. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. By the way, shout out the international listeners. There were a lot of y'all, whether it was Australia, the UK, or other places. Someone responded to the survey from Poland, which was really cool. I appreciate y'all overseas tuning in and making Locked On Pelicans part of your day. I got another survey for you, a Locked On survey. Locked On wants to hear from you. They've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started, and everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes, and we appreciate y'all helping us out. For your second listen, it's Locked On Saints. Season's here. What's it going to look like for the black and gold? Ross Jackson is covering everything Saints over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's talk about Zion Williamson as a franchise cornerstone, because one of the questions was, do you believe Zion can still become a true franchise cornerstone? We had literal couple hundred responses to this survey, okay? 51% of you said, yes, Zion can still become a true franchise cornerstone, right? That might seem good. It's the majority technically, but it's kind of wild because that's barely half, right? Like that's half. It's a coin flip on the guy the Pelicans have built this entire era around. That's not confidence inspiring. You know, for the rest of it, right? The question was yes, no, or unsure. 51% said yes, Zion can still become a true franchise cornerstone. 26.2% said no, and 22.8% said unsure. So basically 50% said no, or like, I'm not sure yet, right? Again, this is the entire guy, or this is the guy the Pelicans have built an entire era around, and it's a coin flip. You know, it's a combination of the injury history, you know, at times inconsistent play on the court. Like in the beginning of the year, it takes him a while to get into game shape and kind of like play up to his potential here, right? The perception of that the team's overall ceiling is heavily tied to him, and they're not reaching that, which is going to sour people on him, right? Fans just aren't worried about games being missed. Is he the right guy to lead the team going forward? You know, if Mike Detillier has long said the best ability is availability. And, you know, there have been questions about his commitment to this team, to, you know, his leadership when it comes to this team. And truthfully, I think he wants to be here. I don't think there's any sort of issue with that. I don't think he wishes he was elsewhere or anything like that. He has not done or said anything that should make anyone believe that he's in fact said the opposite, assuming we're taking him at his word, which I don't think there's a reason not to, right? You know, you look at the recent comments from Joe Dumars, who said they're directly challenging Zion to be that leader, to be a franchise cornerstone. And maybe in one sense, they're empowering Zion Williamson to be that kind of franchise guy more so than he's ever been. Maybe in the David Griffin area, they were coddling him a little bit. You famously heard David Griffin be like, this is Drew Holiday's team. This is Brandon Ingram's team. Never really said it was like Zion Williamson's team, but that is something that Joe Dumars is doing. He's pushing him more to be a leader. He's holding him more accountable in terms of leadership than maybe we've ever seen before, and getting him to, or trying to get him to embrace being the team leader, right? Dumars did say, Zion has said he sees this team as home. That should inspire confidence, in my opinion, right? But even with that clarity from the front office, the fan survey shows that like a slim majority really buys that and believes it. And that's what makes Zion the biggest problem and the biggest solution, right? You know, here's that paradox that I mentioned in the beginning. The same fan base that doubts Zion Williamson also knows that when Zion Williamson plays, he's transformational. There's this kind of like begrudging, I don't want to say it's respect, but this begrudging acceptance of if they're going to be good, it's because of Zion Williamson. Fans are split because they've seen his brilliance, but they've also seen how fleeting it can be. It's a combination of fear and hope, like this ultimate paradox in one player. It's truly kind of fascinating from like a psychological perspective, I think, when it comes to it here, right? We'll get into kind of like some of the playoff stuff in the next segment here from the fan survey. But you think if Zion plays, the team can be good, right? Like that's the thing here. You know, if we want to see this team, say, become a title contender, we talked about Trey Murphy yesterday, and I think he can be a franchise cornerstone, the face of the franchise, but he's not there yet. He's got to take a step forward to be able to do that. So if this team is going to be like that competitive this year, if they're going to be that good this year and kind of like laugh at all the naysayers, national media and others that have been truly clowning on the team since, let's call it draft night, even the Jordan Poole trade a day or two before, that's the type of thing that, you know, you're going to need Zion for. The team, I think, can be competitive enough if Zion Williamson goes down injured. They've kind of proven that in years past, truthfully, that they can still be a play-in tournament team even without Zion Williamson, as long as it's not like last year where everybody is getting hurt. But if you have it here where Zion misses some time, like the ceiling is dramatically lowered. But if Zion plays 65 plus games and is healthy for the postseason, then what does that look like, right? Again, you want to believe in this guy because for the Pelicans to be relevant, competitive, he's the best chance that they got. At least next season. He's the best chance that they got. After that, who knows? But you can see this fan base is kind of like teetering on Zion Williamson right now. You know, in the survey where there were questions that were like open-ended and you could write in, you know, a lot of people doubted it, right? Like doubted Zion Williamson here when it comes to it. You know, one of the things that came up the most, we talked about it in yesterday's show, what excites you most about this upcoming season? You know, Trey Murphy like ran away with that one, but a lot of it was just like seeing Zion be healthy. Hopefully Zion's going to be healthy, right? What concerns you most about this season? Health and Zion were the top answer here. Health and Zion. When I put in other thoughts on the Pelicans for an open-ended response from people, a lot of it was like, you've got to trade Zion Williamson, right? Like you have to move him at this point. You can't keep building around him, and that's a big part of the problem, right? You know, someone said, here it is. I genuinely think a healthy Zion puts them as the third or fourth best roster on paper in the West, right? There's an argument to be made for that. There's absolutely an argument to be made for that sort of thing. But on the flip side of it, right, like any other thoughts on the Pelicans, someone wrote, this one's funny. I just want the suffering to end because they're tired of getting their hopes up for Zion Williamson only for him to get hurt. And then this team ends up winning 21 games or whatever it was that they won a year ago. It's exhausting. We've been through this ringer of things and, you know, kind of running it back feels like the wrong thing to potentially do around Zion Williamson. Look, Joe Dumars knows it. You know, when he was on that Saints interview that we talked about here, he had even said, you know, we're challenging Zion that like, you can't do the things that you have been doing before and expect different results. That cliche definition of insanity here. Something's got to change with Zion Williamson. Hopefully Joe Dumars is going to be the guy to bring it out of him because I think you only get one more year of this. Like if it doesn't work this coming year and he plays another 30 games, like you've just got to make a change because it's too exhausting and you're really seeing the rest of the fan base agree with that. But look, let's be positive next. If Zion stays healthy, fill in the blank, then what? What does 65 plus games of Zion Williamson mean for the Pelicans next year? Let's break that down. That's coming up next. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, it's got to be Locked On NBA. We're still there every single weekday. There might not be games, but there's still big stories around the association. And there are games. They're just in Europe. We're covering Eurobasket for you. It's a lot of fun seeing NBA players on the international stage have massive games. It's been a lot of fun to cover that. Make Locked On NBA your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we're talking about Zion Williamson kind of being a paradox in a sense, right? Like, I think that's what it is. You know, here's where the paradox really becomes striking to me. Despite all of the doubt, if Zion Williamson plays 65 plus games this year, 75% of Pelicans fans that responded to the survey think the team will make the playoffs. Over a third, this percentage is 36.6%. Even think the team could win a first-round series if Zion Williamson is healthy in the playoffs. That's what makes Zion so maddening. Right now, look, it's people looking at their own team, so I do think these tend to skew a little bit more positive with certain things. Because when you look at this team, they've only made the second round of the playoffs twice, I think, in franchise history. Twice. And yet there's this still like almost universal acknowledgement that if Zion's on the floor, the Pelicans aren't just competitive, they might be dangerous. So if you want to have a chance to just have some success here, again, it goes back to what we said in the last segment. It's going to be because of Zion Williamson. You know, it also highlights how much pressure is on him. The supporting cast, Trey Murphy, Jordan Poole, they're all talented. But this team ceiling is almost entirely tied to Zion's availability. One missed stretch, and that ceiling drops dramatically. Again, I think they can be a play-in tournament team, get into the playoffs in the first round that way, but lose in the playoffs. You know, if Zion's not playing, I don't think anyone thinks this team can win a first-round series. But if Zion is playing, over a third of you think that. That's despite basically 50% being like, I don't trust Zion's health. You know, again, it's a 2.4 out of 5. That's 50%, less than 50%, right? You know, I think when you look at that, it's interesting. And that's why this fan base is so split, right? Zion is both the biggest problem because we can't count on him to stay on the floor, and the biggest solution because if he does, the team for this franchise can make history in a sense. That tension, that paradox defines how Pelicans fans are thinking about this team right now. It's a really interesting and different dynamic that you almost don't want to give up on Zion Williamson because of what he represents, the potential that he has, even though it's just never been reached for a variety of reasons. A lot of that's on Zion. Some of it's on the franchise. Some of it's just randomness, chaos, external factors, and all of that too. But it's one of those things of if you want this team to reach its maximum ceiling, maximum potential, you've got to buy into Zion Williamson. But history has shown you shouldn't do that. It's tough, right? It's tough being a Pelicans fan. The survey results really say it, I think that 50%, 51% saying yes, Zion can be a franchise cornerstone, 26.2% saying no, 22.8% saying like not a chance. If you break it down for, how far the Pelicans can go in the playoffs if Zion plays 65 plus games, 38.6% said just first round. A number of y'all, 14% said play in tournament. Maybe you lose in there. Maybe you get into the playoffs or not. But basically, in terms of missing the playoffs, that's actually the better way to look at it. In terms of just flat out missing the playoffs, if Zion Williamson plays 65 plus games, I don't know why I didn't notice this earlier. Only 2% of responses, again, hundreds of responses, only 2% said they'll miss the playoffs if Zion plays 65 plus games. 9% of y'all sickos said conference finals are better if Zion plays 65 plus games. I think you're messing with me there, but I like the optimism. Zion, again, the best chance for success, but the potential biggest problem as well with this franchise. It's truly like a maddening thing here. So the big takeaway for me from all this was Zion Williamson is kind of like the hinge point for everything the Pelicans want to do. Fans are very, as am I, wary of his health, skeptical about his role as a cornerstone. I think that also means you're doing things properly. You're being the leader that you need to do. But everyone is also painfully aware that if he's on the floor, this team's a legitimate playoff team, whatever you kind of want to use when it comes to all of that. And that's why Zion Williamson is the ultimate paradox, the player that frustrates you, excites you in the same breath here. And this season, a lot is riding on him. And the Pelicans front office, coaching staff, and fans have to kind of like balance all of that here. Because look, team's got to be good. They don't have their first round pick next year. They need to try and be competitive and like do the thing here. And yeah, it's a little bit kind of scary because you don't have confidence in him. Going back to the first question, right? 2.4 out of 5 that Zion Williamson can stay healthy, right? That's below neutral. It's below 50% here. That is not encouraging, and I completely get it. He has missed more games than he has played, and there's not a lot of faith in him right now. We'll see if that ends up changing here because, look, until Zion Williamson proves he can stay on the court, this conversation is going to hover around the team and hover around him. We'll see what ends up happening. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you have faith in Zion Williamson? Did you lose it if you don't? I'm curious about what y'all have to say when it comes to Zion Williamson, the faith in this team. So tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans, this one's kind of fun to me. When I had those 1 through 5, 1 through 10 questions out there and asked you to rank them, I averaged all of those. Yeah, everything is like right in the middle. We're going to look at all of those. What are some of the outliers with it too? But I think it's kind of funny that, it's the middle of the week and people feel mid on the team. It's kind of gimmicky, but it works a little bit. Let's talk about that and look at how people compare this team to last year, what you're excited about, concerns, and more. That's going to be in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.